Can we just talk about the irony of we're going to have a productivity roundtable. The government is only going to make changes it took to the election. It'll take them about a year to do that. They have a 3-year term, so they're going to do nothing for 2 years. I know how they can triple their productivity. They can do something in the other 2 years.
Look at that.
One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. As the government's big productivity roundtable kicks off, the Prime Minister said he expects it to be, quote, a contest of ideas. Just not about tax, apparently.
Well, there'll be a range of ideas floated. Governments make government policy, and our tax policy, the only tax policy that we're implementing, is the one that we took to the election.
According to New Australia Institute analysis, the government could raise an extra $70 billion a year with just 3 changes to how we tax wealth. That would mean billions for health, education and infrastructure that could make Australians happier, healthier and more productive. Joining me to talk about this new research, the Productivity Roundtable and the latest interest rate decision is Australia Institute Senior Economist Matt Grudnoff. G'day, Matt.
G'day, Eb.
Now, before we dive into the Productivity Roundtable and tax reform, the Reserve Bank finally cut interest rates last week. Finally. Do you think there will be more to come? And what's this going to do to the housing market?
Yeah, good questions. Yes, I think there will be more to come. The interest rates are still dragging the economy down, so the Reserve Bank will need to cut unless it wants an Australian recession eventually. So yes, they will come. They'll probably come slower than they need to. I think that they probably should have cut 2 or 3 times more by now, but we'll probably see at least another one this year and then probably a couple next year. What will it do to the housing market? Well, it's going to increase house prices. We just had an election campaign where, the major theme you'd have to say was we need more affordable house prices. And suddenly afterwards, we're going to see house prices jump up. Why? Because when interest rates go down, people can borrow more. If everybody shows up to the auction with their banker saying you can borrow more, then up goes the price.
So it won't do anything for more affordable housing, in short?
No, because it doesn't either increase the supply of housing or reduce the demand. And they're the only 2 ways that you can make housing more affordable. We've either got to build more houses or reform negative gearing of the capital gains tax discount and take some of that investor demand out of housing.
Yeah.
They're the 2 ways you make housing more affordable.
All right. Well, we might come back to those 2 taxes, but I just wanted to talk about the paper that you released this week with Dave Richardson on taxing wealth better. Now, regular listeners of Follow the Money will understand why that's important. But for those who don't really know the arguments around why we need to tax wealth better, why is that important?
Australia's really bad at taxing wealth. We tax it really lightly compared to other developed countries. In fact, we're so bad at it, we don't have very many direct wealth taxes, almost none at all. But also, when it comes to things like capital gains, which is effectively the income stream from wealth, we tax that at a discount as well. So we tax it bad in all sorts of aspects.
And when we talk about wealth, how is that different to like the income tax that we pay, for example? What's the difference between those 2? Yeah,
so an income is what you earn. It's a flow of money to you, and it comes in all sorts of forms. Most people are, aware of, salaries and wages is the main one, but, you can earn interest, you could earn profit, you can earn income in all kinds of different ways.
Wages,
yep. Wealth is the stock of assets that you own. So if you take all the things that you own, the value of all the things you own, you take off all your debts, that's your net wealth. That's how much stuff you own. And while income is unequally distributed, we all know that, wealth is even worse. It's far more unequally distributed than even income. And so there are a small number of people who have a lot of wealth, which is why it's such a great thing to tax.
So you and Dave found that Australia can raise billions of dollars a year with just 3 policies. The first is a 2% wealth tax on those with net assets over 5 million. Take us through that and how that would work.
Yeah, so once a year, your assets would be valued. If you had more than 5 million in assets, then you would have to pay 2% of that net amount to the government in tax. And now, to be clear, if you've got more than 5 million in net assets, so assets minus debts, then you're in the top 5%. So we're only talking about a small group of people in that.
So 95 out of 100 Australians, this won't affect them.
It won't affect at all, no.
Yeah.
And also the tax would be excluding the family home and your super. All right. So
okay.
Even then, right? Like this will raise over $40 billion a year, to be clear, and it has enormous.
So it's
amounts
only
of
people
exemption.
with like a few spare houses and yachts.
Exactly right. Yeah, or enormous shareholdings, or assets like that.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask. So what kind of things are we talking about when we say assets? It could be share portfolios, it could be property.
Investment properties, share portfolios, businesses that they own, those kinds of things. They're the main assets that it would probably target. These people have the most capacity to pay because they've usually got they've got a lot of wealth, and so it's well targeted in that regard. But more importantly, it's a part of Australia that is lightly taxed and not currently being taxed very well. And so what are the advantages of that? Well, it means that we can have better government services, and or we could cut taxes to those that are struggling. It's about sharing the load of taxation and finally capturing a group that's largely managed to avoid it.
Yeah. The second policy idea you outlined was scrapping the capital gains tax discount, as we just talked about before. It's obviously especially relevant for housing. So what are the reasons why that would be a good idea?
Well, the capital gains tax discount, if you earn income as a wage, for example, you pay your full marginal rate. If you run a business and earn profit, full marginal rate. If you get, dividends from companies, full marginal rate. Pretty much any way you earn income, you pay your full marginal rate, except for one, and that's capital gains. We treat capital gains entirely differently. And capital gain, to remind everybody, is when you sell an asset for more than you bought it for. That's a capital gain.
So you haven't necessarily, it's not like you've worked extra hard
Exactly
or you've become
right,
more
yes.
productive. Just this asset that you own has appreciated in value.
Yeah, so if you work, you're creating goods and services. If you run a business, you're creating stuff. You're adding to the economy. Capital gain means you bought an asset and then you sold it for more. You haven't added anything to the economy.
So there's no good reason effectively why it should be taxed more
lightly.
lightly.
In fact, there's a strong economic argument that say we should tax this kind of passive income, this income that doesn't add anything to the economy. We should tax it more heavily than active income that's adding to the economy. But in Australia, we do the reverse, right? We actually tax it less. So the capital gains tax discount means if you made a capital gain of, say, $20,000, then the tax office says $10,000 of that is tax-free. That's yours. You can keep all of that. We'll only tax $10,000, half of it. And so it's a crazy system. It encourages people to earn income by speculating. So speculating is when you're counting on assets going up in price. It's added to the housing affordability crisis by encouraging investors to come in, speculate on the housing market, push the price up and make it unaffordable. So not only would it make housing more affordable, it would also raise almost $20 billion a year.
Wow. So it's actually costing us a lot to give out this tax concession every year.
Absolutely. It's a huge tax concession. It adds nothing to the economy. It encourages speculation, and it's making our housing less affordable.
And who does it benefit?
Oh, overwhelmingly the top 10%. So over 80% of the capital gains tax discount goes to the top 10% of income earners.
Oh my God, over 80%.
Yep, it is almost exclusively to rich people or
so
high income
reverse
people.
Robin Hood.
Oh yeah, definitely. So this is a really bad tax concession, and it's costing the budget enormous amounts of money, and there's no good economic reason at all for it to exist.
Okay, and the last policy suggestion in this paper was an inheritance tax on large estates. This is the kind of thing that the media often takes as hugely controversial, but is it really?
I don't think it is as controversial. I think it's unknown. So Australia used to have inheritance taxes. About 40 years ago, they existed. Basically, they got rid of them, largely because Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, yes, that's how far back we're going, when he was Premier of Queensland, he wanted to attract old people to come to Queensland and live in retirement. And so he got rid of them as a way of attracting them. Come to Queensland, die here, it'll be cheaper. And so what happened is that other states, in order to stop this from happening, they also got rid of them. So it was really a race to the bottom. And because we haven't had them for so long, people don't really understand what they are anymore. And so there's a lot of fear around what they are. So just to be really clear, much like the annual wealth tax, this would only be targeted at people with really large estates. The vast majority of people...
Well, first of all, don't even own a house.
Yeah, well, exactly right. Increasingly don't even own a house. But even those that do, the vast majority of them will never have to pay an inheritance tax. It really is targeted at the top 5% or less. And it's a once-in-a-generation chance to basically redistribute wealth, which we know is excellent for the economy and society, and raise revenue that can be then used to provide services that Australians need and want.
The economy is supposed to serve the people, not the people the economy. And we sometimes get that confused.
The problem here is these families with $10 billion in assets that pay nothing.
The responsibility of the Treasurer is really to make sure that the budget, the money, is used to improve the well-being of the people of Australia.
And we know that this kind of inequality that comes from taxing the ultra-rich very lightly, it's actually bad for economic growth. Isn't that what economists have found over the years?
Absolutely. What they found is that more equal societies grow faster, have stronger, more robust democracies, and have less internal strife. And so reducing inequality is good socially, it's good economically, it's just good all round. I did some research a few years ago that found that countries with higher taxes are wealthier, healthier, and happier. And this is one way of doing it, by reducing inequality, using that money to provide services that everybody has access to. We actually build a better society.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but a few years ago, you also did some research that showed that in the kind of decades after World War II, basically when the economy grew, most people shared in the benefits of that. So that old saying of a rising tide lifts all boats really was the case, and it was shared pretty equally kind of across the Australian community. But after the GFC, that really kind of changed, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in the 50s and 60s, the top 10% got about 10% of the gains from economic growth, which means the bottom 90%, the vast majority of people, shared in 90% of those gains. But by the time we get to the GFC and that kind of just over a decade between the GFC and the pandemic, the top 10% got 93% of the gains from economic growth. 90%, the vast majority of people, only got 7% of those gains. So the vast majority of the gains from growth are going to a very small group of people, and that is causing enormous economic harms, but it's also causing enormous social harms.
So, yeah, if it feels like the economy is not working for you, it's not in your imagination.
No, it's genuinely happening, and wealth taxes is one way of correcting that.
Yeah.
Our own productivity problem hasn't been with us for a couple of years. It's been with us for a couple of decades.
We are focused on delivery and getting things done, but how things are done are also important.
But I think limiting ourselves to ruling things in or out forever has a cancerous effect on our policy debates. I think it can rob an informed and modern country like ours the flexibility and the maturity that we need to respond to big challenges.
Political change, whether it's in the economy, social policy or the environment, is likely to be more successful and more entrenched and more lasting when people come with us on that journey.
So moving to the government's economic roundtable now, which is just basically kicking off as we record this. Treasurer Jim Chalmers said he didn't want to play that game of ruling things in and out ahead of the roundtable. But the Prime Minister then kind of after that came in and said, well, hold your horses. Yeah. Actually, the only tax policy we're going to implement is what we took to the election, which was, to be clear, not much. I mean, can you really address productivity and have an economic roundtable without meaningfully looking at tax reform?
Not an economic reform roundtable. I think the tax system is in desperate need of reform. We talk about it regularly, all the different reforms that need to happen. So, look, I think optimistically you could hope that perhaps the economic reform roundtable will kick off a discussion that will then push the Labor Party into taking a better platform to the next election, or even to push them, hopefully, to make some changes in this term. Certainly, they have a huge thumping majority. Now is the time to make real change. Hopefully, they just won't squander this.
It seems absolutely wild to me that any government would kind of restrict themselves to the only things we can do is what we took to the election. Like, things happen in politics, economic circumstances change. Yep. That just seems to me
and also
so weird.
Can we just talk about the irony is we're going to have a productivity roundtable. The government is only going to make changes it took to the election. It'll take them about a year to do that. They have a 3-year term, so they're going to do nothing for 2 years. I know how they can triple their productivity. They can do something in the other 2 years.
Look at that, already helping productivity, Matt. So the other thing that I think has come out of the media in the lead up to this and the government trying to set expectations around this is, look, we're not going to talk about tax reform, certainly not anytime soon, but what we really need to address is the good old red tape, that neoliberal agenda of reducing red tape. Is that really going to fix productivity?
No, this is a really sad place for this debate to go. And the reason is because people, when they talk about, we need to reduce red tape, and I think 29 business groups came out and say we need to reduce red tape by a quarter, whatever that means. Let's reduce red tape by a quarter. They're not coming out with suggestions on what red tape, what regulations we should get rid of. Are we talking about perhaps getting rid of regulations in childcare? Because at the moment, there seems to be the exact opposite, right? So regulations are there to protect people, right? They're there for a reason. And if there are some regulations that aren't good, and sure, look, there probably is some regulations that aren't good, then people should come up and say, well, I think we should get rid of these regulations. But by saying, we should just get rid of regulation, you're creating this kind of amorphous bad guy that, we all hate. Nobody likes red tape. That's bad. So the government can just step back and say, yes, we'll do something about red tape, and suddenly any kind of reform is off the table. We're just going to deal with red tape. You've given them a free pass to do nothing effectively.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about is something that doesn't seem to have been mentioned, I guess, a huge amount, certainly not in the context of red tape reduction, is climate change. We've seen a lot of commentary around actually the huge problem we need to deal with is apparently our environment laws.
Yep.
But not any real mention of climate change. Doesn't even look like it's really going to be on the agenda. We often talk about climate change in terms of the impact that, it's going to have on the environment and human health and things, but there's obviously huge economic impacts as well. Would it be right to include that in a conversation about productivity of the Australian economy?
Absolutely. So, climate disasters are going to have huge costs, including costs to productivity on the Australian economy. Climate change has been largely pushed to the background. And despite being one of the biggest issues that Australia will face, and we've seen an algal bloom, we've seen continuous flooding sort of almost every other month. There are large parts of Australia that have slipped back into drought, particularly in South Australia. And, it's going to be summer and we're going to go back into bushfire season. These have big costs on the Australian economy. And while it might be fun to kind of basically say, we just need to tackle red tape, that's easy. But, coming up with a a carbon price, which would be very good for productivity and would tackle climate change, well, that's hard. It's much easier to sort of vaguely talk about red tape than to actually do something and properly tackle reform, including things like climate change.
We've got a situation where the nurses of Australia pay more tax than the oil and gas companies, and so we'd also propose a 25% on the revenue from gas exports in Australia.
We're one of the biggest gas exporters in the world, and we get next to nothing for offshore LNG. That should be on the table. We should be raising more revenue from our gas exports.
Yeah, and I was really interested to see that as much as the government seems to be trying to hose down expectations for this roundtable, there are people that are coming with an ambitious reform, including, I think the ACTU had a proposal, for example, for tax on gas exports, a 25% tax on gas exports. So clearly there are some other ideas that people are hoping to advance here. Something like that kind of a policy prescription, how would that impact on productivity if it's targeted at exports, basically? Like, what implications would it have domestically, I guess?
Certainly no negative implications. So gas is kind of a natural monopoly. You know, if you've got the right to mine the gas, then nobody else does, and it's yours. And gas is sold on the international market at a huge profit in Australia. And so therefore, if you were to whack a large tax on it, gas companies are going to continue to export as much gas as they can because it will be slightly less profitable, but it'll still be very profitable. And so what we're doing effectively is just giving that gas away and not getting the benefit from it. And so what sort of implications does it have for productivity? Well, you know, it's not going to harm Australia in any way to tax gas. In fact, if the government then uses that to add to the government services that can be productivity enhancing, think about if we made education cheaper, tertiary education, for example, degrees are becoming incredibly expensive, and that encouraged people to go out and become better educated, that will improve productivity. So there's all kinds of productivity enhancing things the government can do if it has the revenue to do so. And this is a way that the government can get a whole heap of revenue. Not least to say also that, gas is a massive greenhouse pollutant, right?
Yeah.
And so even if it were to have some impact on gas sales and it would reduce the amount of greenhouse gas that was going to be burnt, that can only be good for Australia.
That can only be good, yeah. So speaking of can only be good, if you were running this economic roundtable, what ideally are some of the things, like what would be a good outcome from this roundtable?
An actual ambitious reform. One of the big problems that Australia has faced over the last 25 years or more is that governments have been very timid to do anything apart from fiddle around the edges. And the problem with fiddling around with the edges is it never actually solves the problem. And so what we do is we have governments that come out with a list of 3 announceables that will kind of make the problem slightly less bad and nothing else. And then it's let's move on to the next issue. And so government need to pick an issue, whether it's climate change, whether it's housing affordability, whether it's competition policy, and basically pick an issue and then do something substantial to reform it. They've got a huge majority. They could pick something and actually make a real difference. And if people see governments actually make real reform, then they're going to be more likely to support the next reform. If you can point to it and say, look, we made this change and it made your life better, right? You are better off because of it. They're going to go, okay, well, do another one, do another reform.
Yeah.
Rather than being scared of reform because they don't know what real reform actually looks like.
Well, and what would they be scared of at this point? They've got such a huge majority. It's really almost impossible, and I don't say that lightly, for the coalition to come back at the next election. So it's not any kind of electoral
and that's
backlash.
The
that
advantage to that, right, is if they've got 6 years, they've got time for whatever reform they put in place, if they do it quickly, for the benefits of that to become apparent, for people to be able to look back and go, oh, yes, things got better after that. Whereas sometimes you get a reform and the benefits don't appear for a year or a few years, and suddenly you're facing an election and the kind of benefits haven't materialised. Well, this Labor government has an opportunity to make real reform and then reap the benefits of those reform and be able to say, look, we did something. We made housing more affordable. Home ownership rates have risen under us because we made that reform. Trust us with this next reform.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for chatting with me.
You can hear more every week on Dollars and Cents, our podcast that explains just what the hell is going on in the economy, which you can find via the show notes or wherever you get your podcasts. The second edition of our Vantage Point series is also out now. Dead Centre, How Political Pragmatism is Killing Us by Richard Dennis is available for just $19.95, or you can become a subscriber to the Vantage Point essay series and save $15 a year. Find out more via our website at australiainstitute.org.au/store or tap the link in the show notes. This episode was recorded on Tuesday the 19th of August. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.